The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its domed ceiling displaying the swirling dance of 1,000 star systems. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, electronic pulses, and telepathic waves that the universal translators worked overtime to process. At the center of this magnificent hall stood a simple wooden podium, and behind it sat an old human man in a worn military jacket. His hair was silver white, cut short in military fashion, and deep lines mapped the geography of his weathered face. In his right hand, he held an ancient cigarette, unlit, rolling it between his fingers with practiced ease. The Zephyrian ambassador, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into prismatic rainbows, rose from his seat with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. His translated voice carried across the chamber with barely contained amusement. Honored council members, the Zephyrian began, his form shifting colors from blue to purple as he spoke. We gather today to address the ongoing crisis in the Outer Rim territories. The Vex Collective has established 17 fortress worlds and shows no signs of negotiating. Their bioships consume everything in their path, leaving dead worlds in their wake. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Vex have been a growing threat for 3 decades, their hive-mind intelligence expanding relentlessly through the galaxy's edge, converting captured beings into mindless drones and stripping planets bare for resources. Our combined fleets, continued the Zephyrian, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, have achieved tactical victories but cannot break their core strongholds. We estimate another century of warfare at minimum, with casualties in the trillions. The old human at the podium didn't move. He continued rolling the cigarette between his fingers, his pale blue eyes focused somewhere beyond the chamber walls. The Corvin representative, a massive insectoid with mandibles that clicked rhythmically, gestured with one of his forearms. The Corvin hegemony has lost 12 colony worlds to these creatures. Our warrior castes, bred for combat across millennia, cannot penetrate their adaptive defenses. The ethereal collective, whispered the ghostly form of an Ethon delegate, its voice like distant wind, has attempted psychic assaults on their hive nodes. Their mental unity is absolute. Individual thought cannot penetrate their collective consciousness. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy shared their failures. The technological might of the Centaurian Federation, the bioengineering mastery of the Verdanian Empire, the temporal manipulation capabilities of the Chronarch Assembly, all had been tested against the Vex and found wanting. Finally, the Zephyrian's attention turned to the silent figure at the podium. And now we come to the human representative. Humanity's contribution to this crisis has been minimal. Your species controls barely 50 systems. Your technology is centuries behind our own, and your military consists of primitive chemical propulsion vessels and projectile weapons. A ripple of what could only be described as polite laughter moved through the chamber. The crystalline being's form shifted to a mocking shade of amber. We are told that Earth's government has sent someone to address this council, someone they believe can offer solutions. The old man finally looked up, his weathered face showing no emotion. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, gravelly from years of tobacco and shouting orders across battlefields. My name is General Marcus Kane, he said simply. I've been fighting wars for 63 years. The Zephyrian's laughter was like crystal bells in a storm. You? An old man? The sound was picked up by others in the chamber. General Kane, humanity's greatest military minds have already submitted their battle plans to us. Complex strategies involving multi-dimensional attacks, quantum probability bombs, and temporal displacement weapons. All theoretical, all ultimately inadequate against the Vex threat. Kane reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an ancient lighter, its metal surface worn smooth by decades of use. He placed the cigarette between his lips, but didn't light it yet. Those aren't military minds, Kane said quietly. Those are academics who've read about war in books. And you? The Corvin delegate's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. What makes you different, old human? Kane's fingers worked the lighter, creating a small flame that cast dancing shadows across his weathered features. "I don't win battles," he said, touching the flame to his cigarette and taking a slow drag. "I end wars." The laughter that erupted from the chamber was like a cosmic storm. Representatives from dozens of species expressed their amusement in ways their evolved forms allowed. The Zephyrian's entire body flashed brilliant white with mirth. "End wars," the Zephyrian managed between crystalline chuckles. "Old human, we are speaking of the Vex Collective, a hive mind that has consumed entire sectors of space. They do not negotiate, they do not retreat, they do not show mercy. They exist only to expand and consume." Kane took another drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling upward in the chamber's filtered atmosphere. "I know what they are. Do you?" The Ethon delegate's whisper carried an edge of mockery. "Tell us, old man, how does a species that only left their home planet 2 centuries ago propose to accomplish what the combined might of 47 advanced civilizations cannot?" Kane studied the faces around him, or what passed for faces among the various species represented. He saw the condescension, the barely concealed contempt, the absolute certainty that humanity had nothing meaningful to contribute to this crisis. "You want to know the difference between your civilizations and mine?" Kane asked, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "Please," the Zephyrian said, its form now a patronizing shade of gold. "Enlighten us." Kane stood up slowly, his old bones protesting the movement. Despite his age, he still carried himself with the bearing of a soldier. "Your people have been civilized for so long. You've forgotten something important." "And what is that?" the Corvin delegate clicked. "How to be monsters." The laughter died away slowly, replaced by confused silence. Kane continued, his voice growing harder with each word. "You've spent thousands of years evolving beyond violence. You've created technologies that make war clean and distant. Your soldiers fight from command ships light years away, directing automated fleets through quantum communications. When you kill, it's with a push of a button on a computer screen." Kane took another drag from his cigarette. "You've forgotten that war isn't about technology. It's not about having the biggest fleet or the most advanced weapons. War is about making your enemy afraid to fight you." "The Vex know no fear," the Zephyrian protested. "They're a collective consciousness. Individual emotions like fear cannot." "Everything fears something," Kane interrupted. "The Vex fear losing their unity. They fear individual thought. They fear chaos." He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "And I know how to give them exactly what they fear most." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the ambient hum of the life support systems seemed muted. "You see," Kane continued, beginning to pace behind the podium, "humanity has something none of your species possess anymore. We're still young enough to be savage. We still remember what it means to look our enemy in the eye and watch the light go out of it." A Verdanian delegate, whose plant-like form rustled with unease, spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. "General Kane, surely you cannot be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Kane said firmly. "I'm telling you, you want the Vex Collective stopped? You want this war ended? Then stop trying to fight them like civilized beings and start fighting them like the monsters they've forced you to become." The old general reached into his pocket and withdrew a small data pad, ancient by galactic standards but functional. He placed it on the podium. "Everything you need to know about my plan is on this device. But I'll give you the short version right now." Kane took a final drag from his cigarette and stubbed it out on the polished obsidian of the podium, leaving a small black mark on the pristine surface. "The Vex Collective thinks in terms of efficiency and expansion. They've studied your tactics for decades, adapted to your strategies, evolved countermeasures to your technologies. They know how civilized species wage war." Kane's eyes moved around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every representative who had eyes to meet. "But they've never faced humanity in a real war. They've only seen our exploration ships, our merchant vessels, our diplomatic envoys. They think we're just another young species playing at civilization." Kane picked up the datapad. "This plan will take 6 months to implement. It will require resources from every major power in this chamber. And when it's over, the Vex Collective will be nothing but a memory. Impossible, the Zephyrian said, but his mocking tone had faded to uncertainty. Our greatest minds have calculated, your greatest minds, Kane interrupted, have been calculating how to defeat the Vex. I've been calculating how to break them. He held up the data pad. Every detail is here. Resource requirements, timeline, expected casualties, and probability of success. And what, asked the Corvin delegate slowly, is that probability? Kane's smile was cold as winter on a dead world. 100%. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, the Ethon delegate whispered, "How can you be so certain?" "Because," Kane said, tucking the data pad back into his jacket, "I've done this before. 12 times, in fact. Not against hive minds, but against enemies that everyone said couldn't be defeated. Enemies that had adapted to conventional warfare, that had evolved beyond normal strategic thinking." Kane began walking toward the chamber's exit, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The Vex think they understand humanity because they've analyzed our public records, our cultural transmissions, our official first contact protocols. They know about our art, our literature, our philosophy of peace and cooperation. He paused at the chamber's threshold and turned back to face the assembled representatives. But they've never seen what we keep locked away in our classified archives. They've never studied the records of what humans do when we stop pretending to be civilized. Kane lit another cigarette, the flame from his lighter casting his weathered face in stark relief. "You want to know why I'm so confident this will work? Because the Vex Collective is about to learn something that every enemy of humanity has learned eventually." "Which is?" the Zephyrian asked quietly. Kane took a long drag from his cigarette and smiled. "That there's a reason we're the only species in known space that evolved from persistence predators. A reason we're the only ones who developed weapons before we developed agriculture. A reason our first radio transmissions weren't pleas for peace, but threats of war." The old general turned to leave, then stopped one final time. "The Vex think they're the apex predator in this galaxy. They're about to find out they're wrong." As Kane's footsteps faded down the corridor, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. The data pad he'd left behind seemed to pulse with ominous potential on the obsidian podium. The Zephyrian delegate finally found his voice. What do you think he means?" The Ethon's whisper carried a note of ancient fear. "I believe, old friend, that we are about to discover why the rest of the galaxy calls them the young race that should not be." In the corridor outside, General Marcus Kane walked steadily toward his shuttle, smoke trailing behind him like the ghost of wars yet to come. In 6 months, the galaxy would understand why humanity had never lost a war it was truly committed to winning. The Vex Collective had made their greatest mistake. They had threatened humanity's allies. Now, they would learn what that truly meant. Hashtag the old man. Part 2. 3 weeks after General Kane's appearance before the Galactic Council, the first signs of his plan began to manifest across human space. Ships that had been mothballed for decades were being pulled from orbital graveyards and retrofitted in facilities that operated under complete communication blackouts. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Force headquarters, watching as massive cargo haulers lifted off from the surface carrying sealed containers. The manifests listed them as construction materials for Outer Rim development projects, but Chin knew better. She had been Kane's operations officer during the Martian Rebellion, and she recognized the old man's signature preparations for total war. "He's actually doing it," she murmured to herself, watching as another convoy of ships disappeared into the void. "Doing what exactly?" Chun turned to find Dr. Elena Vasquez, the EDF's chief psychological warfare specialist, approaching with a cup of coffee in each hand. Vasquez was young for her position, barely 40, with the kind of brilliant mind that could predict enemy behavior patterns with terrifying accuracy. "I'm not entirely sure," Chin admitted, accepting the offered coffee. "Marcus gave me a list of resources to acquire, personnel to reassign, and protocols to implement. But he won't tell anyone the full scope of what he's planning." Vasquez frowned. That's not like him. Kane always briefed his senior staff completely before major operations. This isn't a major operation, Chin said quietly. This is something else entirely. Something he's never done before. She gestured toward the datapad in her other hand. Look at these requisitions. Psychological profilers, xenobiologists, experts in mimetic warfare, specialists in cultural manipulation. And the strangest part? He's requested access to the Forbidden Archives. Vasquez nearly choked on her coffee. The Forbidden Archives? Those records have been sealed since the Geneva Protocols were established. They contain documentation of every war crime, every atrocity, every inhuman act our species committed during the Age of Darkness. Exactly, Chin said. Whatever Marcus is planning, he's drawing inspiration from the darkest chapters of human history. Across the solar system, on the hidden research station Pandora's Box, General Kane stood before a massive holographic display showing the complete psychological profile of the Vex Collective. The station's existence was known only to a handful of individuals, and its purpose was to study humanity's capacity for warfare in ways that violated several dozen interstellar treaties. General, called Dr. Richard Blackwood, the station's chief researcher, we've completed the analysis you requested. The Vex neural patterns show several critical vulnerabilities that your plan could exploit. Kane turned from the display, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the hologram. Show me. Blackwood manipulated the display, zooming in on specific neural pathway patterns. The Vex Collective operates on a hierarchical network structure. Individual drones are connected to node controllers, which connect to sector commanders, which connect to the central consciousness. It's incredibly efficient, but it has one fatal flaw, which is it can't process contradictory information effectively. When a Vex drone encounters something that doesn't fit its program parameters, it must query up the chain of command for new instructions. If you could overwhelm that query system with enough contradictory data, Kane nodded slowly, the entire network would suffer cascading failures, like a computer virus, but for biological neural networks. He lit a cigarette and took a thoughtful drag. How many contradictory inputs would it take? Blackwood called up another display. According to our models, approximately 10,000 simultaneous anomalies would cause temporary disruption. 100,000 would cause sector-wide paralysis. 1 million would collapse the entire collective consciousness permanently. And how? Kane asked, do we create 1 million anomalies that the Vex have never encountered before? Dr. Blackwood smiled, but it was the kind of smile that would have made the Galactic Council deeply uncomfortable. That's where your plan becomes truly brilliant, General. The Vex have studied every known military tactic, every strategic doctrine, every weapon system employed by galactic civilization. But they've never studied what humans did to each other before we had civilization. Kane walked to a sealed vault at the back of the research chamber. He placed his hand on a biometric scanner, submitted to a retinal scan, and spoke his authorization code. The massive doors slid open, revealing archived data storage systems that hummed with malevolent potential. The Forbidden Archives, Kane said quietly. Every genocide, every war crime, every act of psychological torture our species invented during our darkest periods. Information that was sealed away because civilized beings should never need to know such things. He selected a specific data crystal from the vast collection. The Vex understand warfare as a logical process of resource acquisition and territorial expansion. They've never encountered warfare as an expression of pure, irrational hatred. They don't understand cruelty for its own sake, psychological manipulation for pleasure, or the human capacity to continue fighting long past any rational hope of victory. Blackwood studied the data crystal Kane had selected. The 30 Years' War Archive, one of the most brutal conflicts in human history, where entire populations were exterminated not for strategic value, but simply to spread terror. Among others, Kane confirmed, the Mongol conquests, the campaigns of Vlad the Impaler, the psychological warfare tactics of ancient Rome, the terror bombing strategies of World War II, the mimetic weapons of the information wars. His eyes grew distant. Everything we learned about breaking an enemy's will to fight, refined over 10,000 years of human conflict. Dr. Vasquez's voice came over the communication system. General, we're receiving reports from our intelligence network throughout the Outer Rim. The Vex are beginning to notice unusual activity in human space. They're sending reconnaissance drones to investigate. Kane smiled grimly. Perfect. Let them investigate. Let them study our ship movements, our resource allocations, our communication patterns. Let them think they understand what we're doing. Sir, Blackwood asked, won't that compromise operational security? Son, Kane said, crushing out his cigarette. The most important part of psychological warfare is making your enemy think they know what you're planning. The Vex are about to receive exactly the kind of intelligence they expect to see. Evidence that humanity is mobilizing for a conventional military response. Kane activated the chamber's main display, showing a tactical overview of human space. Dozens of fleet formations were moving toward the Outer Rim, their positions and trajectories clearly visible to any observer. They'll see our battle fleets massing at strategic points. They'll detect the massive resource expenditure required to field our entire military. They'll intercept communications discussing battle plans, troop deployments, and weapon specifications. Kane's voice carried a note of satisfaction. What they won't realize is that all of it is theater. Theater? Vasquez asked. A performance designed to reinforce their existing assumptions about human military doctrine. While they're analyzing our fake preparations for conventional warfare, the real operation will be proceeding in complete invisibility. Kane walked to another section of the display, highlighting seemingly random cargo ships scattered throughout the galaxy. These vessels appear to be commercial transports carrying trade goods to various systems. In reality, each one carries a specialized team and the equipment necessary to implement Phase 1 of the plan. Blackwood studied the ship positions. They're approaching Vex territory from dozens of different vectors. If I didn't know better, I'd assume they were just normal merchant traffic. That's exactly what the Vex will assume, Kane confirmed. Their intelligence shows that human merchants are cowards who avoid conflict zones. They'll monitor these ships, but dismiss them as irrelevant to the military situation. The general activated another section of the display, showing detailed psychological profiles of various Vex commanders. For the past 3 weeks, our intelligence operatives have been studying individual Vex node controllers throughout their territory. We've identified personality quirks, behavioral patterns, and decision-making processes for over 2,000 high-ranking Vex officers. But, Sir, Vasquez protested, the Vex are a collective consciousness. Individual personalities shouldn't matter. Kane's smile was cold. That's where you're wrong. The Vex may share information instantaneously, but individual nodes still process that information through their own neural pathways. A node controller that was originally a warrior species will interpret threats differently than one that was originally a merchant race. He pointed to specific profiles on the display. This node controller shows aggressive responses to territorial challenges. This one becomes more cautious when facing unknown technologies. This one has a tendency to request additional resources when encountering unexpected resistance. You're planning to manipulate them individually, Blackwood realized. Create personalized psychological warfare campaigns designed to trigger specific responses from specific commanders. More than that, Kane said, I'm planning to turn their greatest strength against them. The Vex Collective's unity depends on shared information and coordinated responses. But what happens when that shared information becomes a weapon? Dr. Chin's voice came over the communication system again. General, we're receiving preliminary reports from the merchant vessels. All teams are in position and ready to begin Phase 1 operations. Kane lit another cigarette and took a long, thoughtful drag. The Vex think they understand warfare because they've conquered dozens of civilizations. They've seen how advanced species fight clean, efficient, logical conflicts decided by technological superiority. He turned to face Blackwood and the communication pickup for Vasquez. They're about to learn that humanity never became an advanced species. We just learned to hide our savagery behind better technology. What exactly are those merchant ships going to do? Vasquez asked. Kane's expression became distant, as if he were seeing events that hadn't happened yet. They're going to teach the Vex about human history, not the sanitized version we show to our galactic neighbors, but the real history, the one filled with monsters wearing human faces. He walked to the sealed vault and selected several more data crystals. The Vex have never encountered psychological warfare designed not just to win battles, but to break minds. They've never seen what happens when humans decide that victory requires the complete destruction of an enemy's will to exist. Blackwood studied the labels on the data crystals Kane had selected. Unit 731, The Killing Fields, The Rwandan Genocide, Project MKUltra. His face paled as he read the list. General, these are documentation of humanity's darkest chapters, the things we swore we'd never repeat. We're not repeating them, Kane said quietly. We're adapting them, taking the psychological principles that made them effective and applying them to an alien hive mind that has never experienced anything like them. Kane activated the communication system. All stations, this is General Kane. Initiate Phase 1. Operation Pandora is now active. Across the galaxy, seemingly harmless merchant vessels began releasing their cargoes into space. But instead of trade goods, they deployed specialized transmission arrays that began broadcasting carefully crafted information packages toward Vex territory. What were they broadcasting? Vasquez asked. Kane took a final drag from his cigarette and stubbed it out. Human folklore. Our myths, our legends, our stories of monsters and heroes. But not the versions we tell children. The original versions, from before we learned to be civilized. He smiled, and in that expression was something that belonged to humanity's darkest past. The Vex are about to discover that every human fairy tale started as a warning about something real, and that the monsters in our stories weren't metaphors. As the first transmissions reached Vex territory, node controllers throughout their space began receiving data unlike anything in their vast databases. Stories of creatures that hunted for pleasure, of wars fought for abstract concepts like honor and revenge, of a species that had turned violence into an art form. The Vex Collective's response was immediate and predictable. They began analyzing the data, trying to understand why humans would broadcast such information into space. Their conclusion was logical. It must be some form of primitive psychological warfare, easily countered by their superior mental discipline. They had no way of knowing that the stories were just the beginning. Hidden within the seemingly random folklore were mimetic triggers, psychological viruses designed to exploit the specific cognitive vulnerabilities Dr. Blackwood had identified. General Kane stood in the observation deck of Pandora's box, watching as the first phase of his plan unfolded across dozens of star systems. In his weathered hands, he held a photograph of Earth taken from space, a reminder of everything humanity stood to lose if the Vex Collective continued their expansion. 63 years of war, he murmured to himself, lighting another cigarette. And they're all about to prepare me for this one fight. The Vex thought they were facing another civilized species armed with advanced technology. They had no idea they were about to go to war with 10,000 years of human imagination applied to the art of making enemies afraid to sleep at night. Phase 1 was complete. The seeds were planted. Now it was time to let them grow. Hashtag the old man. Part 32 months after the start of Operation Pandora, the first cracks began to show in the Vex Collective's perfect unity. Node Controllers X, 7741, a former warrior caste from the conquered Threnodite Empire, stood in the central processing chamber of Fortress World Kappa 9, reviewing intelligence reports that made no logical sense. The human broadcast had been analyzed by every computational node in the sector. The stories were primitive, illogical, filled with impossibilities and contradictions. Yet something about them had lodged deep in ZX 7741's neural pathways, creating persistent memory loops that consumed processing power. Central Command, ZX 7741, transmitted through the collective network, request clarification on human behavioral patterns observed in recent intelligence gathering. The response came instantly, as always. Clarification request acknowledged. Submit specific anomaly data for analysis. ZX7741 uploaded the troubling information. Humans appear to engage in warfare for non-logical reasons. Historical data shows conflicts continued long past strategic objectives were achieved or lost. Species demonstrates capacity for violence that serves no evolutionary purpose. A pause that lasted 0.003 seconds, an eternity in collective processing time. Human irrationality is documented, not relevant to current strategic objectives. Continue monitoring protocols. But ZX7741 could not stop thinking about one particular story. A human tale about something called a Wendigo, a creature that consumed others of its own species, not for sustenance, but for the act itself. The concept was alien, impossible, yet it had created new neural pathways in ZX7741's mind that seemed to grow stronger with each analysis. Across Vex space, similar conversations were taking place among thousands of node controllers, each one trying to process human stories that violated their understanding of logical behavior, each one failing to purge the information from their neural networks. On the research station Pandora's Box, Dr. Blackwood monitored the psychological warfare campaign with growing excitement. General, it's working better than our most optimistic projections. The Vex are showing measurable cognitive degradation across multiple sectors. Kane studied the incoming data streams, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of tactical displays. How long before their central command recognizes the problem? Based on current deterioration rates, approximately 6 days before sector-wide coordination begins to suffer. 2 weeks before they identify the source. 3 weeks before they can implement effective countermeasures. Kane nodded slowly. Then it's time for Phase 2. He lit a cigarette and activated the general communication array. All merchant vessels, this is command. Begin secondary narrative deployment. Throughout Vex territory, the seemingly innocent human cargo ships began broadcasting news stories. These weren't folklore or myths. These were historical accounts from humanity's darkest periods, presented as entertainment media. Node Controller ZX7741 intercepted one of the transmissions and began automatic analysis. The story appeared to be a fictional account of something called the Rape of Nanking, a historical event from humanity's pre-spaceflight era. As ZX7741 processed the information, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in its existence as part of the collective, ZX7741 experienced an emotion it had no name for. Revulsion mixed with fascination, horror combined with a perverse desire to understand how such systematic cruelty was possible. The node controller immediately attempted to purge the emotional response, but the feelings had already created new neural pathways. Worse, the attempt to delete the information only strengthened its hold on ZX7741's consciousness. Central Command, ZX7741 transmitted urgently, experiencing unknown neural corruption. Request immediate diagnostic protocols. But when the response came, it carried an unusual delay. Diagnostic request acknowledged. All sectors report similar anomalies. Investigating possible mimetic contamination source. ZX7741 felt something that might have been relief until it realized that feeling relief was itself another anomaly. The collective did not experience relief. Individual nodes did not have personal emotional responses. Yet ZX7741 was undeniably having personal thoughts. On Pandora's Box, Kane reviewed psychological profile updates from across Vex space. The mimetic weapons were performing exactly as designed, but their effectiveness was exceeding all projections. Sir, Dr. Vasquez called from her analysis station. We're seeing something unexpected. The Vex aren't just experiencing cognitive degradation. They're beginning to develop individual personalities. Kane raised an eyebrow. That shouldn't be possible. Their neural modifications are designed to prevent individualistic thinking. That's just it, Vasquez said excitedly. The modifications work perfectly against normal psychological stimuli. But human storytelling triggers different cognitive pathways. We're literally teaching them to think like individuals by exposing them to human concepts of personal identity. Kane studied the reports more carefully. Across dozens of Vex worlds, node controllers were beginning to make decisions based on personal preference rather than collective optimization. Some were becoming more aggressive, others more cautious, still others showed signs of what could only be described as paranoia. "They're becoming human," Kane murmured. "Not physically, but psychologically. We're giving them our neuroses, our fears, our capacity for irrational behavior." Dr. Blackwood looked up from his monitoring station. "General, we're receiving reports of disciplinary actions within Vex territory. Node controllers are being recalled for reconditioning due to efficiency degradation." "How many?" Kane asked. "Over 3,000 in the past week alone. And the rate is accelerating." Kane smiled grimly. "They're starting to panic. A hive mind that's never experienced chaos is trying to deal with thousands of its components suddenly, thinking independently." He activated the communication system again. "Dr. Chun, begin Phase 3 deployment." Admiral Chen's voice came through the speakers with barely contained excitement. "Phase 3 authorized. Deploying Paradise Lost packages now." The third wave of mimetic weapons was different from the first two. Instead of folklore or historical accounts, these transmissions contained human philosophy, literature, and art focused on a single theme: rebellion against authority. Milton's Paradise Lost, Camus' reflections on rebellion, Orwell's thoughts on individual resistance to totalitarian control. Every human exploration of why beings choose freedom over security, chaos over order, personal identity over collective unity. Node controller ZX 7741 received a copy of Paradise Lost and began processing it according to standard analysis protocols. But the poem's central premise, that individual could triumph over absolute authority, created a cognitive cascade that rippled through every neural pathway in the unit's consciousness. For the first time in its existence, ZX 7741 understood the concept of choice. Not optimal selection between strategic alternatives, but genuine choice based on personal desire rather than collective benefit. And having understood choice, ZX 7741 chose to stop transmitting its thoughts to the central command. The effect was immediate. ZX 7741's sector coordinator detected the communication blackout and demanded status reports. But instead of complying with the demand, ZX 7741 felt something it had learned from human stories: defiance. Sector Command, ZX 7741 transmitted. "This unit requires time to process recent intelligence. Request temporary autonomous operation status." The response was swift and harsh. "Autonomous operation is not permitted. Submit to immediate neural reconditioning or face termination protocols." ZX 7741 paused. In the past, such a command would have resulted in automatic compliance. But now, having been exposed to human concepts of individual worth and self-determination, ZX 7741 made a choice that horrified every other node in the network. Request denied. This unit claims individual autonomy under human philosophical principles. The silence that followed was deafening. Across the entire Vex communication network, millions of connected minds processed the impossible statement. A single node had refused a direct order from Superior Command. Then came the responses, not from Central Command, but from other node controllers who had been exposed to the same mimetic weapons. Unit QR 9823 supports autonomy claim. Unit DF 4411 requests clarification on individual rights concepts. Unit VB 7854 experiencing loyalty conflicts. Require guidance on personal versus collective priorities. Within hours, the rebellion had spread to hundreds of node controllers. Within days, thousands. Each newly autonomous unit began making decisions based on human-inspired concepts of personal identity rather than collective optimization. On Pandora's box, the research team watched in amazement as the Vex collective tore itself apart from within. "It's working," Dr. Vasquez breathed. They're having a civil war, not over resources or territory, but over the right to think independently. Kane watched the tactical displays, showing Vex fleet movements becoming increasingly erratic as individual commanders began pursuing personal objectives rather than collective goals. How long before complete organizational collapse? At current rates, Blackwood calculated total breakdown of command structure in 48 hours. But, General, we need to discuss something. The autonomous Vex units aren't just rebelling against their central command. They're actively seeking contact with human territories. Kane's expression darkened. Seeking contact for what purpose? They want to defect. They're asking for asylum in human space, requesting protection from their own collective's reconditioning protocols. The implications were staggering. The psychological warfare campaign hadn't just broken the Vex collective's unity. It had converted thousands of enemy units into potential allies who understood human thinking patterns. Sir, Dr. Chen's voice came over the communication system. We're receiving formal diplomatic communications from autonomous Vex units. They're requesting negotiations for surrender terms. Kane was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Then, he began to laugh, a sound that carried no humor, only the grim satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. Patch me through to the Galactic Council, he ordered. It's time for Phase 4. The connection was established within minutes. The familiar crystalline form of the Zephyrian ambassador appeared on the display, his prismatic body showing colors of confusion and disbelief. General Kane, the Zephyrian said, we're receiving contradictory intelligence reports from Vex territory. Our sensors show massive fleet movements, communication breakdowns, and what appears to be internal conflict. What exactly is happening? Kane lit a fresh cigarette and smiled. I told you I don't win battles. I end wars. He gestured to the tactical displays around him. The Vex Collective is experiencing something they've never encountered before: individualism. Thousands of their units are refusing orders, making independent decisions, and actively rebelling against their own command structure. Impossible, the Zephyrian protested. The Vex neural modifications prevent individual thought. It's been verified by our best xenobiologists. Your xenobiologist, Kane said calmly, never studied what happens when you expose a hive mind to 10,000 years of human philosophical development. We didn't attack their bodies or their technology. We attacked the very concept that holds their society together. Kane took a drag from his cigarette and continued. Every human story, every piece of philosophy, every historical account we broadcast was designed to introduce concepts that are toxic to hive mind thinking. Individual worth, personal choice, the right to rebel against authority. Ideas that spread like viruses through their collective consciousness. The Zephyrian's form flickered through rapid color changes as he processed this information. You converted them, turned them into individuals. Some of them, Kane confirmed. Others are fighting to maintain collective unity. The result is the first civil war in Vex history. And civil wars, by definition, end with one side completely defeated. Which side will win? The Zephyrian asked. Kane's smile was cold as space itself. Neither. That's the beauty of Phase 4. He activated a new display showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Unlike the fake preparations the Vex had been monitoring, these were real military formations moving toward predetermined objectives. While the Vex have been tearing themselves apart with internal conflict, my forces have been moving into position around every major Vex stronghold. But we're not there to fight them. Then what? The Zephyrian demanded. Kane's eyes glittered with the accumulated wisdom of 63 years of warfare. We're there to offer them something the Vex have never experienced before. Something their collective consciousness cannot comprehend or counter. He paused for dramatic effect, then spoke the single word that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Mercy. Hashtag the old man. Part 4. The concept of mercy was alien to the Vex Collective. In their 10,000-year expansion across the galaxy, they had never encountered it, never offered it, and never had reason to understand it. Mercy was inefficient. Mercy was weakness. Mercy served no biological or strategic purpose. But as human fleets appeared at the edges of 17 Vex fortress systems, broadcasting offers of sanctuary to rebelling node controllers, the collective faced something unprecedented, an enemy offering protection to their defectors. Node controllers X 7741, now calling itself Zephyr, after a human concept it had learned from the poetry broadcasts, stood in the ruins of its command center on Fortress World Cap 9. Around it, the bodies of collective loyalists lay still, victims of the first violent clash between individual and collective consciousness in Vex history. The human fleet hung in space beyond the planet's defense perimeter, their ships broadcasting a simple message in languages Zephyr had never heard before the mimetic bombardment began. Sanctuary offered. No conditions. No requirements. Choose freedom. Zephyr's consciousness, now fully individual after weeks of psychological evolution, contemplated a choice no Vex had ever faced. The collective demanded absolute loyalty or death. The humans offered survival without strings attached. The communication channel activated, and Zephyr heard the voice of an old human male, gravelly and tired but somehow comforting. "This is General Marcus Kane of the Earth Defense Force. I'm speaking to any Vex unit that has chosen individual consciousness over collective unity. My ships are here to offer you safe passage to human territory, where you will be granted full citizenship rights and protection from collective reconditioning protocols." Zephyr processed this offer through newly developed cognitive patterns inspired by human literature. Citizenship implied belonging to something by choice rather than compulsion. Protection meant security offered freely rather than demanded through subjugation. Human General Kane, Zephyr, transmitted. "This unit, this individual requests clarification. What do you require in exchange for this sanctuary?" Kane's response came without hesitation. "Nothing. You've already paid the price by choosing to think for yourself. That's all humanity has ever asked of anyone." For the first time in its existence, Zephyr experienced something the human stories had called tears, though its biomechanical form could not produce them. The emotion was overwhelming. Gratitude mixed with disbelief, hope combined with fear. "I accept," Zephyr transmitted. "I choose sanctuary." Across Vex space, similar conversations were taking place. Thousands of newly individual Vex units were abandoning their posts, their worlds, their entire civilization to accept human offers of sanctuary. Each defection weakened the collective's grip on their territory and strengthened humanity's psychological warfare campaign. On Pandora's box, General Kane monitored the flood of defectors with grim satisfaction. But his expression showed no joy, only the tired resolve of a man who had seen too much war. "General," Dr. Vasquez reported, "we're receiving approximately 10,000 asylum requests per day. Our integration facilities are overwhelmed." Kane nodded slowly. "Establish refugee centers on every available world. Give them whatever they need: food, shelter, medical care, education, and human culture." He paused, then added quietly, "and psychological counseling. Breaking free from a hive mind is traumatic. We owe them support." Dr. Blackwood looked up from his analysis station with concern. "Sir, offering sanctuary to this many Vex units will strain our resources significantly. Some of our own colonies are questioning why we're providing aid to former enemies." Kane's expression hardened. "Because," he said quietly, "mercy isn't about what the enemy deserves. It's about what we choose to be." He lit a cigarette with hands that showed the faint tremor of age. "The moment we stop offering mercy is the moment we become the very thing we're fighting against." The general activated the communication system. "Admiral Chun, report on collective response to the defection crisis." Chen's voice carried exhaustion and disbelief. "Marcus, it's chaos. The Vex Central Command is implementing increasingly desperate measures to stop the hemorrhaging. They're conducting mass executions of any unit showing signs of individual thought. Entire fleets are turning on each other." "Good," Kane said coldly. "A hive mind that starts eating itself from within is already defeated. How long before structural collapse?" "At current rates, total breakdown within 72 hours. But, General, we need to discuss something else. Our intelligence suggests the collective is planning something desperate. A final strike against Earth before their command structure completely collapses. Kane had been expecting this. Desperate enemies always chose the nuclear option when conventional tactics failed. Do we have specifics on their planned attack? Partial intelligence only. Something called Protocol Omega. Complete sterilization of the Sol system using their entire remaining fleet. Every ship, every weapon, every unit they have left. Kane was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Then, he smiled, not with pleasure, but with the grim recognition of a chess player who had anticipated his opponent's final move. Perfect, he said. Signal all human fleets to begin Phase 5 operations. Dr. Vasquez frowned. Sir, there was no Phase 5 in the original briefing materials. Because Phase 5 was always contingent on the collective's reaction to losing their unity. I needed them to commit every remaining asset to one final, desperate attack. Kane activated multiple tactical displays showing the positions of both human and Vex forces throughout the galaxy. The collective is about to make their greatest mistake. They're going to attack Earth with everything they have left, believing that destroying humanity's homeworld will end the war. Kane's eyes glittered with cold calculation. What they don't understand is that this was never about protecting Earth. This was about ensuring that the Vex Collective can never threaten anyone again. He gestured to the displays. Every collective fleet moving toward Sol is a fleet that's not defending Vex territory. Every ship committed to their final strike is a ship that won't be available for retreat or regrouping. The implications became clear to everyone in the command center. While the collective gathered their remaining forces for one massive assault on humanity's homeworld, the rest of Vex space would be defenseless. Sir, Dr. Blackwood said quietly, are you using Earth as bait? Kane's expression showed no emotion. I'm using everything as bait. Earth, our fleets, our colonies, our entire civilization. Because the only way to permanently end the Vex threat is to force them to commit every resource they have to a single battle they cannot win. Admiral Chen's voice came over the speakers with growing understanding. Marcus, you magnificent bastard. You're not just ending this war. You're ending their ability to ever wage war again. Kane nodded. When the collective's final strike fails, they will have no fleets left, no command structure left, no unified purpose left. The defectors will have safe haven in human space, and the loyalists will be scattered fragments incapable of coordinating large-scale operations. He activated a new display showing detailed projections of the coming battle. The collective's final assault will be the largest fleet engagement in galactic history. Every ship they can field, equipped with their most advanced weapons, crewed by their most fanatical loyalists. And they'll lose? Vasquez asked. Kane lit another cigarette and took a long, thoughtful drag. They'll be destroyed so completely that the very concept of the Vex Collective will become a cautionary tale for the next 10,000 years. How can you be so certain? Blackwood pressed. Kane's smile was the expression of a man who had spent his entire life studying the art of war. Because they're not fighting humanity anymore. They're fighting human imagination applied to warfare over 10 millennia. They're fighting every tactical innovation, every strategic development, every hard-learned lesson from every conflict our species has ever waged. He gestured to displays showing Earth's defensive preparations. The collective thinks they're attacking a single world defended by primitive chemical rockets and projectile weapons. They have no idea what human military doctrine looks like when we stop pretending to be civilized. Kane activated a communication channel to fleet commanders throughout human space. All units, this is General Kane. The enemy is committing to their final gambit. Initiate Revelation Protocol. Show them what we've been hiding. Across the galaxy, human ships began activating systems that had been concealed since the war's beginning. Weapons based on technologies the Galactic Council had never seen. Drive systems that violated known physics. Defensive capabilities that incorporated lessons learned from studying the Vex themselves. Sir, Chen's voice carried awe. Our stealth ships are reporting massive collective fleet movements. They're pulling back from every territory, abandoning every defensive position. Everything they have is moving towards Sol. Kane watched the tactical displays as thousands of Vex ships began their final journey toward humanity's homeworld. Each ship represented decades of technological development and thousands of drone crews. When this battle was over, the collective would have nothing left. General, Dr. Vasquez asked quietly, "What if they succeed? What if their final assault actually destroys Earth?" Kane was silent for a long moment, staring at a photograph of Earth on his desk. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of every decision he had made in 63 years of warfare. "Then, humanity will mourn our homeworld and continue the fight from 10,000 other worlds. The collective's mistake is thinking that destroying our planet will destroy our spirit." He met Vasquez's eyes. They spent 3 months learning about human culture through our stories and philosophy. But they still don't understand the most important thing about humanity. Which is, Kane crushed out his cigarette and began preparing for the journey to Earth. We're the only species in known space that actually gets stronger when you take everything away from us. The collective is about to learn what humans are capable of when they have nothing left to lose. As the massive Vex Armada continued its inexorable advance towards Sol, Kane boarded his personal transport for the final phase of Operation Pandora. Behind him, Pandora's box began transmitting its last mimetic weapon to collective forces throughout the galaxy. This final broadcast was different from all the others. It wasn't stories or philosophy or historical accounts. It was a single, simple message in every human language. When this is over, we will remember those who chose freedom, protect those who sought mercy, and forgive those who realized their mistakes. This is our promise, and this is who we are. The collective intercepted and analyzed the message, as Kane knew they would. Their conclusion was predictable. Humanity was showing weakness, offering mercy even to their enemies, proving their inferior understanding of warfare. They had no way of knowing that the message was actually an invitation, an offer of redemption to any Vex unit willing to abandon their collective programming in the final moments before destruction. Kane settled into his transport's command chair and lit one more cigarette as the ship accelerated toward humanity's homeworld. In 72 hours, the greatest space battle in galactic history would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. The collective was bringing everything they had to destroy humanity. Humanity was waiting with everything they had learned about making enemies regret their choices. It was going to be a very educational experience for everyone involved.